Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle Nepton, Program Committee Chair and Board Member at GPLH. Welcome to the GPLH webinar, Strategies for Grant Writers, Building Community Data Sharing Practices. I am thrilled to welcome you and our speaker this afternoon. But before we do that, just very quickly, our upcoming programs, which are always free for members. Our next Connections call will be at 9:30 a.m. on February 5th. I hope to see some of you members there. On February 19th at noon, we are welcoming Charlie Garg to share her expertise on how grant professionals can use AI to enhance productivity. So you will see some outreach about that coming out soon. And on March 18th, we will welcome our very own Jeffrey Winthal. Hi, Jeff. Back for a presentation covering program evaluation. Jeff's a bit of an expert in that, so can't wait for that one. If you are not a member and you paid for this event, we'll happily apply that fee to your annual membership. So go to our website to become a member and use the coupon code SAVE30. Deb will put that in the chat in case you need it. I will be distributing an email with the recording and the slides to all registered participants today. And these materials will always be available on the GPLH member only, section of the website. I'll also include a survey, a very brief survey after the program, and this really helps us meet your needs. So please complete that. It's short. Couple of house rules. Please mute yourself unless you're speaking, and please refrain from using any AI scribes. They really just interfere with ones that we use. I'll be monitoring the chat for questions, so feel free to add them, but hopefully we have time for some Q&A and some discussion throughout the program as well. I know Allison wants it to be really interactive. So that being said, I'm so thrilled to introduce Allison Paul, today's speaker. Allison is the president of Allison Paul Grant Writing and Consulting. Sorry, Allison. Allison has worked in nonprofit sector for over 30 years, from delivering frontline services in a social service agency to program design and management, where in her role as an executive director of a nonprofit, she was responsible for fundraising, strategic planning, finances, marketing, and working with the board. As a consultant, she now writes grants for clients involved with the arts, advocacy, children, human services, and social justice. Her work includes grant writing, prospect research, assessing grant readiness, editing, coaching, mentoring, and assisting small nonprofits. Has always been a self-identified data nerd, like many of us. Allison is a past co-president of GPLH and was a co-president also of ADO. She serves as education chair for Impact 100 Westchester and has been a grant reviewer for Impact 100 and several others. Allison has taught grant writing at Westchester Community College in the Community Education Division and for nonprofit Westchester's Learning Labs and its BIPOC Thrives program. In the community, she's very impressive. She created the Tarrytown Arts Camp in 2002. And then when she retired from running the camp in 2018, she created the Allison Fund to ensure scholarships are always available for those kids. In 2007, she co-founded MusicWorks, which provides one-on-one music lessons to lower income students in the Tarrytown schools. I love that. She is a proud member of Leadership Westchester class of 2018. For many years, she taught yoga to adults and individuals with disabilities. I did not know that. She is on the board of the Open Door Family Medical Center. All right, Allison. We just love you, Allison. Go ahead, take it away.
Well, wow, that was nice. You did my ego good. All right. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Glad to be here. Although I love data, and I'm not as much of a data nerd as some people that I've invited to be part of this today, Limbery Cabrera and Bijan. I'm not even going to pronounce your last name, but I'm going to call on you as we go through because we have a couple of real data experts and Jeffrey Windfall as well. So I I pitched doing this, and do you see my screen? Am I good here? I I have been concerned about data for several months now, and I pitched doing this, and I wasn't sure my concerns were that widely shared initially. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why I think data is at risk right now, and then posit some alternative sources or things we can use. So I'm going to leave you with a robust amount of grant resources, data resources. some of them I know you'll know, um, but some of them hopefully will be new and helpful. And then I want to, well, actually, what am I doing? This is the overview. Why worry about data? Some data rescue efforts, resources for you. And then I really want to make this open that we share data and our data findings, what we're seeing is missing or gone, what we're doing to compensate, and make a strong pitch at the end to work with each other. GPLH has always been, I think, somewhat remarkably collaborative. And again, towards the end in Limbury, I'm going to ask you to talk about some things that Westchester Children's Association is doing to share some of our local data. And Bijan has some expertise in helping nonprofits hone their own data. So that's the overview I have for today. So getting right to it. Why worry about data? And it's more than just the fact that I don't sleep well at night. I'm not the only one. Here's a report from the American Statistical Association, the nation's data at risk, in big, bold letters. So it's not just me. I extracted just one or two things from this report to share with you. For instance, and this report is from December, so it's timely. The nation's federal statistical system, long regarded as a model, is facing a period of unprecedented strain, uncertainty, and transformation. Over the past years, agencies that collect data have experienced steep losses of personnel, including senior managers with a lot of institutional knowledge and who mentor newer employees. We've lost specialized data scientists, methodologists, and recent hires with up-to-date skills. And this is a threat to our democracy. So why worry about data? Further in the report from the American Statistical Association, they have like 5 main categories: cuts in statistical programs, delays in having data produced, or it comes out with reduced detail or canceled altogether, decreases in budget or staffing, undermining leadership, and confidentiality. So we're just going to touch quickly on some of those concerns. From the report, George Cook has been named acting director or is the director of the U.S. Census Bureau. He is a political appointee, not some with experience in this field. So that's a leadership concern. And I think everybody on this call relies on the U.S. Census Bureau and the American Community Surveys. So that's of concern, certainly to me and perhaps now to you. And then, just going on, I'm not going to go in detail, but there's delays in putting out data reports that we expect and rely on. There's been cuts and a reduction in staffing and resources. I think a lot of people on this call maybe do work with children in education. The last point here I put in, the Department of Education is proposing that the 2026 data collection for the National Assessment of Educational Progress be done without the foundations of evidence-based policymaking. And that has to do with confidentiality assurances. So that's of great concern too. Another thing that's happened in the past year, many agencies have volunteer advisory panels of outside experts that guide and advise about everything to do with data collection and presenting. Voluntary panels that have been disbanded include the 2030 Census Advisory Committee, and that is a really important survey. Bureau of Census Scientific Advisory Committee, one that has to deal with racial, ethnic, and other populations, and so on, including one at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. As much as possible, I'm listing my sources where I get my information from because I think all of us care about data, the veracity of the data, and where we get it from. So I hope that this PowerPoint or PDF, when you get it, will have hyperlinks you can use. Why worry about data? Here's a report from the Century Foundation concerning international issues. The State Department has not made updated, reliable, accurate data on, I have to move everybody over, accurate data on the status of former and USAID and State Department programs. So we all know about the end of USAID, but all the data, all the reporting they did, it's just also just gone. Okay. Chronicle of Philanthropy, I think many of us subscribe. Whoops, sorry. In this past January, many of us look to find what foundations funded in previous years. There's been some big delays. Fewer people working at IRS. There's been big delays in posting private foundation data. Data has been collected but not shared. For instance, the Civic Health Index, collected but not shared. And some of this is a survey by the US Census Bureau that tracks attitudes on volunteering and work, whether people donate to charity and other measures of community connection. But I bring this up because some of this also involves AmeriCorps, and there's a lot of questions about AmeriCorps, which is heavily involved in citizenship and volunteering, if it's even going to be continued, since there doesn't seem to be as much interest in civic health these days. Why worry about data? Here's some data that's no longer being collected. Census are no longer going to include questions on sexual identity and gender orientation. So that has an impact on the National Crime Victimization Survey, so that we are not tracking, violence against transgender people, etc. I think some of you have emailed me. The USDA is no longer producing an annual survey on household food security. I don't know about you, I've used that data in some of the grants I've written. USDA no longer collecting data every December through the Current Population Survey Food Security Supplement. And Lim, you're welcome to chime in if I don't say enough, but there's concern about the 2030 census beyond just reduced funding for it. They're calling for a census that would exclude undocumented people from the count. I don't know, Lim, if you want to say anything else about this, but that means, census has to do with how many Congress people we have to represent us. And if people are uncounted but live here, they're using schools, roads, water, public works, and to have no representation is something.
Yeah, and the census is also used to determine some monetary allocations for funds and grants, so where the money will go, in terms of regional efforts and whatnot. And my mind, I'm going to admit right here, like my mind has jumped into the conspiracy hole and thinking of all the ramifications, but I don't want to freak people out right now. But one of the criticisms I have, just as Liberty Cabrera, is the response rate for the census if it does happen, and the implications if people don't respond, even if they are documented. So so that's enough what I'll say right there.
Okay, and it'll come up again.
Confidentiality, that's a concern of mine. And if they're going to measure response rates, and what would they do with the data with those response rates, and
Yeah.
comparing it to previous censuses. So
Thank you. Thank you. All right, we're moving on, and we'll come to that again, more about the census. Oh, okay, yeah, there we go. Stoking fear, people will be afraid to respond, and I think just a lot of trust is gone in data and data collection. And if if I fill out a survey, is it safe? Why worry about data? Again, trust is eroding, but it's not just, and this is again from a letter to the editor in December. The US role as a trusted information source is under threat, and we've talked a little bit about disruptions to federal data systems, but there's a bigger concern as well. America uses more data for decision making than ever before, and AI applications increasingly draw from government data sets. And businesses make decisions based on federal statistics and federal payment. So, that's, AI uses a lot of data, and the data is not accurate, or if it's pointed, then that has huge repercussions. Okay, so that was all about some of the reasons I'm concerned about data and right now. Um, there are some great groups across the country that are doing literally data rescue efforts. And I've just listed a bunch. Um, I haven't necessarily gone into them, but one of the big ones is Data Rescue Project. So there's a hyperlink there. It started almost a year ago, and it's being coordinated by different organizations. That's a data rescue to reclaim data that might be taken down or might have been taken down. And then Data Rescue Tracker is another one. And there are several that you could go in to find, I guess, would we say archived or just past data? Um, so these are for your reference if you're looking for something in the past that you think you can't find or has been removed. Um, so for instance, I did play around with some of them, Data Commons. Some of these you can still use to get some local data. For instance, I went to Data Commons and I did a query. I wanted to find out about arrests in Westchester County, and I was able to do it. And the source was the FBI. I hope FBI data is still good. I don't know. Are you seeing that or not? No, probably not. Okay. So these are some sources I've used or that you can reference. Other national data sources, we all know about the Census Bureau and the American Community Survey and the other surveys. I put them in red because I'm worried about the integrity of these going forward.
mm-hmm.
Here are some other national data sources. Some may or may not get some data from the Census Bureau, but some might pull from other sources. And another of concern, the Deportation Data Project, I don't know if it stopped collecting and reporting, I think for good in October, which is of huge concern. So those were some sources, federal level, or now I'm going to move into New York State, where you can still find data on New York State. I think we're all very lucky to be in a state that has perhaps values still that we share in terms of data and taking care of people. So there are a lot of places to find data in New York. None of this, perhaps none of this will be new to you, but here are, some of the big ones. A closer look at data New York, you can get into all kinds of different
Oh, wow.
categories, and get data sets, maps, charts, on any number of categories. It's a great place to start for New York State data. And then I know for all of you that when you write your grants, you're probably familiar with some of the state agencies. I've just listed a handful. As you know, there's lots. But if you're not so familiar with some of them, you can use this as a reference for special ed, tax and finance, labor. At least maybe we can still get some labor stats that we can still believe in. Crime data. I think a lot of us work right for children. I'm sure you know about some of the Office of Children and Family Services website and their data website, New York Council on Children and Families, and other resources for finding out about kids. Those of you that work in health, I see some people I know that write grants for health I didn't see on the call, but there's a lot of data about health that we can access. I just listed a couple of places. And our county's pretty good about sharing some data on health. I poked around on some websites to go a little deeper than I had before, and I had fun at the Office of the New York State Controller. There's a bunch of things you can find on their website. I just cut and pasted one chart, an asylum seeker report, and spending report. Interesting to see how it climbs. Here's another one on the controller's website, New York Financial Snapshot percent of unbanked households, i.e. people that do not have bank accounts. So I had some fun doing that. And there's more there.
Alison, I'm going to pipe in, like with data.ny.gov, you can find completely random things that you never would expect the state to track. For example, the winning lottery numbers, I think since 1980, if like some random bits like this. But, one thing I do want to emphasize that, even if you go into the New York State data sets and, we know what the political environment in New York State is like, mistakes can also be made. So familiarity with the data is something that you have to keep in mind. I have gone through two data sets from two state completely separate state departments, and I've caught errors in those data sets. One is pretty big, is the Yonkers under age 18 arrests. At the moment, I still think they're still listing 0 as the number of 18 arrests, and they've done so since 2022. So don't check me on that, but you could definitely take a look at the website. And so as you start getting familiar with the data, and one thing I want to emphasize is definitely get familiar with the data and the communities that you're writing for. And so if something looks suspicious, I'm just going to offer, feel free to give me a call if you see something a little odd. It's like, the staffing levels for, I'm giving you a hint here, the staffing levels for guidance counselors, they seem to have gone, precipitously down between one year and the other. There's actually been a technical change in NYSID where they changed the particular field in the staffing levels. So several school districts have been affected there. So this is actually brings up another point, is just because you detect an error in the data set, it's not necessarily a conspiracy. A lot of it is like a technology issue. And I know that, Alison, there's going to be a later slide about collecting your own data. So I will hold back on what I want to say there until later. But yeah.
And I was remiss in not introducing you. Limarie is the director of Data, Finance, and Operations at Westchester Children's Association. And we're going to talk more about it too, but Lynn is the person I go to when I have data questions. And she's great. And we'll talk more with her. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I do want people to chime in. So let's see. Let's go on. Okay. I think many of you go to New York State Education Department for a lot of data. And I've gone into the basic stuff almost for every grant I write. But I played around more and I hadn't found this before. You can do comparisons. So you can have a quick comparison. I chose Tarrytown versus Westchester counter enrollment by ethnicity. So you could do any number of different things. So that was nice and can save time. I think I have another slide about also on New York State Ed, they do a digital access survey. And this is some of the questions on the survey, and you can get some of the data on the answers. We are lucky in New York State that we now have we have free breakfast and lunch for kids who were qualifying for free and reduced lunch, which is great and is so helpful to so many families. But I wondered, does that mean districts are no longer collecting free and reduced lunch data because they don't need to? And what I think I've learned is that if you're a Title I school, you're still collecting and reporting that data. What I don't know is going forward, if wealthier school districts will still be compelled to complete that free and reduced lunch data and how that might impact the overall comparisons going forward. And if anybody has anything to say about that, be my guest. Okay. My other fellow data person I talked to is Jeffrey Winthal, who's on this call at the United Way and also a board member for GPLH. And he sent me these two websites for more on New York school data. So thank you, Jeffrey, and you can have fun with these, everybody. I think also everybody is very familiar with United for Alice, certainly something we all rely on. They do use census data, but other things as well, census data and a lot of Bureau of Labor Statistics data. So I'm curious to see what will happen going forward. The Cornell program on applied demographics does a lot of data work, and I have used them. And interestingly, when I was working on this presentation, I reached out to them and asked some questions about doing this presentation and data concerns. And they wrote back and said, oh, yes, we share your concerns. We see a lot of worrisome signs with the American Community Survey. We're worried about early retirements, the lack of staff to verify the data. We also are starting to see declining response rates. And he mentioned lack of political will to rectify any of these data issues. So there you go. So just some other New York State places to go. Jeffrey also sent me this link for the New York State Federal Impact Interactive Map. Again, I zeroed in on Westchester County. You could look at any county. Some of you work in others. And you can get all kinds of data and some very nice charts. So thank you for that. And then that brings me to Westchester. We have a lot of data resources here in our own county. Before I do that, does anybody want to chime in about any other New York sites that they use or they find helpful? I can't see anybody, so just speak up. Okay. All right, whoopsie. So back to Westchester. Um, I've already mentioned the New York State Education Department. Some of you probably are familiar with the Westchester Index from the New York Community Trust. If you've been on it lately, you see that it's pretty out of date. And I reached out to Laura Rossi, who told me that there are some pretty big updates happening in 2026. All indicators will be updated, all data will be. And they're adding 3 criminal justice indicators, taking some other things away. So I'm sure they'll do some kind of big launch when they are able to update it. And that has X number of indicators, a limited number of indicators. And we can go into that. And they also provide some context. So that can be helpful and will be helpful as they update it. Westchester County departments, I've had great luck reaching out to Community Mental Health and Planning Department, Youth Bureau. So you can always try. Some departments are more helpful than others. Some data is available on websites, but a lot is not. But an email, a nice email, and you can sometimes get the data you need. And I urge you also to attend events such as Westchester Children's Association's annual Commissioners' Conversations, where you can actually meet, hear from county commissioners and talk with them and introduce yourself, exchange emails, and that sort of thing. Westchester Children's Association has tremendous resources, data reports, dashboards, blogs, a wonderful resource. And the United Way has 211 call logs. They'll share some of that data with you. And Jeffrey, I don't know if you want to chime in if there's any other data that United Way has or wants to share or is willing to share.
I mean, for 211 is we collect it annually, but it's an ongoing process where we collect every caller's data, even through text messages and through our website. So it's all based on callers' needs. So it's what the request for, whether it's housing, food insecurity, whether it's like finding the nearest food pantry to where they live. It's also based on their geographic location too. So this covers the entire Hudson Valley, Long Island, the Adirondacks region, and we also cover the Northeast region, which is like Albany and northward. So I think it's like 24 counties in total that we cover. Mm-hmm. So you have to imagine, like we do have a lot of raw data that could ever be used if anyone's interested in, want to see what the requests are like.
Thank you. Because timely data is hard to come by. So those 211 calls and other sources are where we can find some timely data. Thanks, Jeffrey. United for Alice, I've mentioned before, I think a lot of us use it. What I've also done, maybe increasingly now, is I'll look at sources. I try to look at sources. For instance, this is a page on a recent United for Alice report on housing. So here, those of us that like this can just dig into some of these reports and maybe get more data that supports whatever we're writing about. And now talking about timely data. So this, I am going to, promote Westchester Children's Association as a great source of data here in Westchester. And Lynn pointed out that the poverty rate in Westchester has supposedly fallen to 7.7% down. Is this what you guys are seeing and experiencing? And that's based on the most recently available U.S. Census Bureau community service reports. But in fact, that is not the case. So Lim Marie came up with this idea. And Lim, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. Go for it. Why you did this, what you can find.
I promise. Okay. Yes. So we developed Poverty Pulse. This was actually cooking long before any change of administration or whatnot. we were getting frustrated because we were noticing when certain economic events happen, such as a severe increase in inflation, we couldn't necessarily gather economic data that really showed at that present moment what need could be like. Some of you who know me know that I am an avid hiker, and I use the analogy. I say it's like looking at last year's weather report to determine if I should go hiking outside, tomorrow. And so we reached out to several organizations to say, it's like, hey, we want to get a much more timely snapshot of what's going on in Westchester County. Would you be willing to participate? So organizations such as United Way were more than happy to volunteer their data. And, I really super appreciate it on multiple levels. Number one, that they had the infrastructure to provide us with monthly data. Not every organization is there. And, I know, Allison, you're going to talk about what's going to happen next. One thing I would say is for the organizations that you write for, really, if they haven't already, really deeply consider having a data infrastructure there that can counteract some of the gaps that are happening in regards to data collection at the American Community, the U.S. Census Bureau. So what we see here, this is for October 24, comparing the dark line is October 24 to September 25, and the bars represent October 23 to September 24. This is a rolling 12-month graph. But if you look at places like West Hab, they have actually exceeded 100% of their client occupancy rate, in the year 2025, which was unprecedented. And at our Poverty Pulse December release event, they mentioned that several times. And so when, you see this declining poverty rate, and Bijan could also chime in, the poverty rate is an inherently imperfect measure for measuring economic need, especially in Westchester County, for a multitude of reasons, including the fact that it doesn't take into account regional cost of living, but there we are. But, when you overlay the data, year after year, you get to see these patterns. Sharing shelf, we're seeing that the demand for clothing, even when you take into account seasonal fluctuations, the current year, in this case, October 24 to September 25, is exceeding what happened, before. So, I wanted to do this month by month because I want, a lot of times there are seasonal fluctuations. Sometimes, organizations such as 914 Cares, they run into an operations issue, like say they close their warehouse down because they are moving to a new warehouse. So you see these fluctuations that happen, but this also adds to the familiarity with the data sets that I emphasized before. A lot of times averages hide the real story of what's going on, and so being able to go into the nitty gritty really helps. We are planning to do our update. This dashboard will be updated on a quarterly basis. So we are on board to do our update up to year end, and you will see new data, if everything works out in March, So you will get data up to December 2025. And I also want to add that when the American Community Survey, when they update their 5-year estimate data, that will be for the year 2024. I believe the release date is January 29th, so I will be on top of that, and I'm sure my colleagues Jeffrey and Bijan will also be on top of that as well. But, take a look at the website, data.census.gov on January 29th, and pray that the website doesn't go down or something like that. So
thank you. Thank you.
And that is a delay. They usually release the data in early December, but because of the government shutdown, everything went. So there is that. Allison, is there anything else you want me to add?
Nope. I wanted to make a push. Thank you, Limery. To tell people, this is a great resource, and this is just one of the many pieces of data that Westchester
I will
Children's
drop the
Association.
link on the website, on the chat, so you all know.
There's fact sheets and dashboards and blogs as well. So I want you to use this resource.
Yeah.
Thank you, Limery.
And
All
just to add that, in terms of demand. I've never seen a dashboard get as much traction as this one has. So people are definitely looking at it. And we do have United Way data. And Jeffrey, you were mentioning before, you could category. Allison doesn't have that piece there, but for United Way, we actually have a section where you can see some of the categories in the 211 calls.
Oh,
That's
okay,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
This was just a snapshot that fit on here.
Yeah.
There's more. So go to their website. Lim's dropping it in. All right. Moving on. The other place I sometimes look to get data on Westchester it needs assessments. And I posted some of the most recent ones. This top one is being done right now. It's the first time in, I think, 20 years, there's one of the Hispanic community. It's being done right now by PACE. So it's not done yet. There was community action programs do these frequently. Yonkers' most recent is 2025, and other ones. That WCA, the next one is Westchester County Association, not Children's Association. And when I was going through my PowerPoint the other day just to make sure everything worked, and I hope you know that I spend an enormous amount of time adding all the hyperlinks. None of the hyperlinks, I don't think, for the needs assessments worked, but you can Google them. C'est la vie. And hospitals have to do needs assessments regularly. I've gotten some nice data out of some of those. And again, you can Google them. Westchester County does all kinds of health statistics and reporting and needs assessments as well. I'm going to move quickly so we have time for more questions. If anybody wants to put in the chat, if they have some needs assessments that they find useful or have found recently that I didn't list, I invite you to add them to the chat and share with us. All right, just quickly, I threw in some links by topics that may or may not help you. Higher education, I've gotten some data out of some of these. Anything in red, I'm concerned about going forward. I talked to my neighbor who's a vice president for environment at the the Dana Foundation. Anyway, he gave me some of these. Children, just sort of nationally or bigger picture children's data, resources for you. Health, I'm sure those of you that write for health know a lot more. One of the databases that I learned that is not being continued by the feds is the maternal mortality database. Okay. And then I poked around for other things to share with you. I've used polls in the past. Here's one I put up on healthcare from Gallup. Kind of interesting. How many people in the last 12 months have cut back on utilities to pay for healthcare and so on? What I like about polls is they might not be encyclopedic, but they're current. So I've used for other sources, polls and surveys, think tank research, foundation research, and sometimes, with caution, news outlets. I'm guessing these are big ones that you've probably used before or heard certainly on the radio. And then here's just a slide from one Gallup poll. So you can get some good and interesting data from them, and they're generally timely, because right now I'm focusing on how do we get timely data. I've used Pew a fair amount. And then I found this good old Nate Silver. He rates polls. I did not know about many of these polls, and he gives them grades, which I thought was kind of fun, and I hope it makes you smile for a minute. That's why I added this slide. There's a lot of institute and think tanks in America. I quoted the Century Foundation earlier, and here's just a short listing of many, many, many think tanks. I did add a hyperlink for this mass shooting fact sheet since our government has never been big about collecting data on mass shootings because why would we want to know that? And the Rockefeller Institute collects some of that data. There's foundations that focus on grant research. I've had mixed luck. They might give a lot of research grants. They don't always share the results, but some might. And then reliable news outlets. I put some that I think are pretty reliable, but I urge you to always, always, always check the sources. Check, check, check the sources. And I see, I just lost the chat. Whoops. I see there are things in the chat. I'm almost done, so then I'll stop screen sharing and look in the chat. So always, whatever data source you're using, I urge you to check the sources and verify that it's a legitimate source for your own good, but also, the big elephant in the room is AI, and where is AI getting information? If you Google something and you're using AI, is it a source that's verifiable or is it a hallucination? And I don't know, Bijan, do you want to say anything about that or anybody else want to chime in about AI and data?
I think even the experts on AI have so many questions about AI and what's right and what's wrong and what's to come and what's not to come. The future is scary because there's no regulation. But one of the things that's pretty clear is that the AI itself is not really what we should be worried about. It's the information that's being fed into the models. And so one of the things that we can be most aware of is how we feed the models by putting information into them, and also how we take control of our own organizational data, and that we're safeguarding it. And also, I think in some situations, being appropriately compensated for it, because there's a huge amount of money to be made on data. And that's really where the money for AI is, and that's what's going to be driving the field. It's less so the actual technology of AI and more what's feeding that technology.
Wonderful, wonderful comments. Thank you. That's helpful. All right, I'm almost done. Then we'll get off of this. So that was Bijan, and I'm going to ask you, Bijan, to continue to talk about what you do because we've talked about timely data. We've talked about the need to maybe look at our own data and see what's there, especially these days. And you are an expert in that in all things data. So I'm going to give you a minute to plug what you do.
Thanks, Allison. First, I just want to say thank you because um, what you're sharing today and what I saw from an earlier version of this slide deck, you have created such a comprehensive resource. The variety of information in here, I was referring to it as a desk reference because I want to just keep it close by and be able to use it regularly. There's really chock full of information. So thank you for that huge service that you've done for this group and for others. Um, my name is Bijan Kimiagar. Even if you don't say it like that, it's fine because I don't even say it like my own family does, or it's an Iranian name, a Persian name, ancient Persian name. I'm thinking about the people in Iran right now. My other half, my mom was Cuban, so we can have a conversation about what my Thanksgiving dinners looked like with Cuban food and Persian food on the table. Um, but I run Equistrategies. We help mission-driven organizations with designing and implementing equity promoting research and evaluation. And really, what that means is that I work with nonprofits in Westchester, New York State, and also internationally, especially those that are working with children and families doing direct service, to really get a handle on their data, to build their team's data literacy, to build their organizational culture of using data for driving strategic questions, not just reporting questions, bean counting questions, but really how do we leverage data for our long-term strategy as an organization for success? And a lot of that is in thinking about how can we use data that already exists that we as an organization do not need to collect to still be able to gain insights from it. And so the public data that WCA collects and compiles, that Alice, that United Way collects and compiles, there's some of that that's using existing data. And then there's a much harder challenge of collecting your data to answer questions that no other data set that already exists has. And so Equus Strategies, we kind of go through this process of supporting staff with data literacy, data coaching, organizational data culture, seeing what's out there, leveraging that because that's going to be more financially savvy. And then if we can't find the answers to some of what we need, or if it's really about operational data, leveraging our own administrative organizational data, going through that data collection process in a way that's rigorous and ethical, and also is more about just the counting, but actually creating conversations in organizations about how we do our work. And that's one reason why I find the slide that you put together, Allison, so important on needs assessments is that there's an incredible amount of work that goes into a needs assessment, especially when it's done in a way that shows a comprehensive view. And so we should be doing more of them, but in a way that is really satisfying a lot of different organizations' needs for information because they are expensive. And not every organization is as lucky to have someone like Limery, who is an expert in data and storytelling. Most nonprofits do not have research and data staff. That's actually one of the reasons why I started Equus Strategies is to really augment that part of the staff to be able to have some data capacity and to build that capacity among staff who are direct service, program managers, coordinators. Um, and so it's really about the collaboration that we can do between different organizations to then produce data resources, which is why I find the Poverty Pulse work that WCA is doing so valuable. In addition to the recency, it's really creating a conversation amongst organizations about shared understanding of trends in a way that we see a more detailed picture. Um, and I'll just say a little bit of insights from what I see working with multiple organizations and their data needs, and it's something to consider when we're doing grant writing, is that many organizations don't yet have what I call a data catalog, meaning what data do we already have? We're always feeling like we need to find data, but what information do we already collect in different ways that we can leverage? And maybe, especially now with this idea of artificial intelligence needing information, how can we protect the data that we have in ways that maybe we weren't even paying attention to some of the data that we collect? Um, Another activity that I do a lot with organizations is dashboarding, meaning taking data that we have and distilling it into a visual, online, interactive tool that can update regularly and give folks insights that they can use on the daily, weekly, monthly, annually. That's a more delicate process because it requires you to kind of have some data, know how you want, know what questions you want to ask. But really, what it's doing is helping organizations build an organizational culture that leverages data that actually can inform their day-to-day work. And it's that actually informing the day-to-day work where you have conversations around what data do we actually need to do our work better, to make reporting more seamless from month to month or annually, depending on grant cycles. That's some of the questions that come through my work, but it's really about the kind of how do we use data for regular conversations in organizations and not the kind of every year we need to do an annual report, what data can we find? Or we need a needs assessment to inform our grant. How do we find that information? It's really how do we build these muscles throughout the year so that we're ready for the sprint or the marathon at a particular point in time. Allison, you let me know if there's
Yes.
more
That's
you
great.
want
No,
me to say.
thank you. And that's perfect because that's really where I want to end is we, I think, need to turn more to our own data to document need. Bijan is an expert at helping organizations do that. I know some organizations have applied with TAP grants to Regeneron Data for Good to help with that. But I think we're at the point I urge you to consider doing more with your own data or urge your clients to do that, to document need. LIM has pulled together agencies that have collaborated. So we're looking not just at one data set to show poverty, but several. I urge us maybe to start a conversation. Are there some of us that can share data to help us all and how we collect that data? And I think I just want to get out of, I think I want to end the slideshow. Where do we go from here? And have a few minutes of conversation with everybody about what you're thinking and resources and data sharing, and just open it up.
I guess I could say something. I think it's important to know that all these different resources it provides a secondary data resource or informational resources versus the primary data we would collect. Like if you're at an organization or if you work with a client and you're trying to help them build their capacity to collect data, to have those skills, to have that skill set, having that primary data is like the gold standard. It's the best. It's intentional. It tells you what you're trying to collect, it has meaning to it, and whoever is going to analyze that data is going to put meaning, meaning to reflect it based on the reflection of what they're finding from that data set. Where any secondary data that you're collecting or any information that you're getting from the internet or wherever you're getting it from, someone's already analyzed that data for you. They already made a meaning. They already made some kind of meaning based on what that data has shown to them, and they're giving their contextual, I guess, slant to it. So you have to also be concerned about that too. So it's good to triangulate all these different resources to help explain what you're trying to do in your grant writing purpose. If you're trying to propose some kind of intervention idea that you're trying to get funding for, it's great to have that kind of support, that supplemental support, I like to call that. But having primary data from an organization that's already collected data from current and the past would be the best way to know what they're trying to accomplish. So if they're trying to do like an education program, like with elementary school students, if they already collected data from their students that participate in their program, having that kind of data is going to be much better collecting or using some kind of statewide data set. That statewide data set could help triangulate or support what you're trying to say, well, whatever you're trying to make your argument on. But again, it's always best to have your own primary data.
And I mean, what do people think about sharing data, about that concept? Organizations that collect so much. I don't know if there's interest or how we could do that, or if there's a role for GPLH there. But thank you for that, Jeffrey. Or any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I disappeared for a second. Sorry. I just want to reinforce what Jeffrey and Bijan have said. I have a confession to make. In another life, I was a bean counter for a federal grant, Ryan White Title I. And so I had 40 organizations under my portfolio, and I would go every month and say, where are your numbers? And, more often than not, the organizations that didn't have the numbers readily available were organizations that were facing significant organizational challenges. And so if you don't have the ability to pull that data, it raises a question to whoever is holding that wallet. It's like, if they don't have the capacity to provide me with the data or the information that I need right now, what else does this mean? If I took a peek behind it, if I lifted the hood, what other problems are going to be there? And so I wanted to raise that. Another thing that we haven't mentioned yet, and it is a concern, is that given, that these public data sources are going, is the privatization of data, in some of the realms. Like there's one data source that, Bijan, you've heard this 5 million times before, where, they're providing environmental data, but they're, some of their funders, some of their clients are insurance companies. And so, of course, they have a vested interest in saying that your home is at risk of flood or fire or whatever, because then the insurance companies can charge more. So, this has really been a lesson, not for everybody else, but especially for me, to really dig into the methodology of things, find out, Jeffrey, like what you're saying before, is like, find out how this data is being collected. If you're going to turn to those secondary data sources, but you need to find out how exactly the sausage is made. And if you don't, if it's overwhelming, then reach out to Bijan, reach out to Jeffrey, reach out to me and say, I don't understand this. What the heck is going on here? And, a lot of my time is spent reading methodologies, to find out just exactly how they came up with that number.
Yeah, Lim told me she looked at who's on the board of some data set. Yeah.
I just want to pipe in because I have a client who's really good at this. She's very experienced and understands. Even when founding an organization, one of her first things was to write for an evaluator and a data analyst collector person when we started going for federal grants. I don't think a lot of people have that kind of savvy and don't understand what kind of infrastructure, even the simplest, that you might need to have in order to start creating data, whether it's going into a room and counting who's there, like whatever it is that you do, or to set up some kind of record system that helps you to easily collect data. And for the more grassroots organizations, it's just really tough. They just don't have bandwidth. So I think this conversation is incredibly important, and that, you know, I'm not sure. I think it's great if it's possible to, share what we've collected. I mean, Allison, maybe we just put out what you have and send it out in a newsletter, send out some of the tools that you've collected. And I'm so grateful to you for bringing in Lee Marie and Bijan, because I think that, and Jeffrey, obviously, because people who've really been in the trenches and have been out there using the tools, like in my world, that's GIPRA, SUPTR, whatever it is, um, you know, knocking on doors, talking to people, they have experience that the rest of us really don't. And it's very valuable, everything that you've said and the resources that you've given. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else?
Lim is pointing out that Excel is not a secured, confidential, data system,
No.
unfortunately. But you're right, Deborah. I think pointing out the capacity of some of the smaller nonprofits that many of us work for or with, there are partners, they just don't have the capacity. They're just like, they're doing the hard work and collecting the data and, using that to show the need is not in their forefront. They're, feeding people and making sure they have, housing or whatever. And it's just not, all of us obviously know how important that is, but it's not necessarily at the forefront. So definitely some great,
I know
great
Lisa's
ideas and
the
comments.
president of a food pantry, and there's concerns about data and safety and confidentiality. I don't know, Lisa, if when you brought up Excel is not a secure database.
Yeah, we actually use something called Food Bank Manager to record the clients that come in every month, numbers, and age differences, so we can report that. And I use that for grant writing. There's another one called Link to Feed, which is what Feeding Westchester wants people to use. Someone on my board checked into Link to Feed, and maybe this was just us. We didn't feel like the data was as secure as we wanted it to be. Even though Food Bank Manager is a cloud-based system, we're now looking into some insurance for, cyber crime and stuff like that. But even when you have these big data management systems, it's hard to know how secure it is on them. We're kind of comfortable with Food Bank Manager right now.
Thank you. And I want to mention something else talking about confidentiality. I worked with the client. We gathered all this data. We, had a draft of the grant. Then she, on her own, decided to put it all into ChatGPT and came back and said, "Oh, look, isn't this great? They tightened up in this and that." I said, "Did you put all that data about your clients in ChatGPT?" And she said, "Oh." So, beware, or advise your clients, or just beware what you actually put in ChatGPT for it to just edit something down for you. Well, if you have sensitive information in there, now it's out there.
That's a huge concern. I mean, it's a huge concern for me because I think that for most of the organizations that we work for or that we help, their capital is intellectual capital. It's their ideas, it's their innovations, it's their interventions. And in this very competitive field of getting support, you have to be able to differentiate yourself, and keep your edge to yourself. And I think that, it's tough because AI really is a help, when you've got a funder that has 5 different strategic plans that they want the required activities to align with. And, you can input all that stuff and it'll spit it out in a minute. And you can do that certainly in a way that's scrubbed where you're not putting in anything proprietary. But it's really a concern. And are the paid services really any better? Is there really truly confidentiality? And
That's another webinar, right?
yeah,
The
it totally,
confidentiality
absolutely.
of those paid service on AI. Yeah.
Yeah.
But thank you. Any other comments, questions? Well, thank you. I hope this is helpful. I hope it sparks some thinking on your parts and can advise clients and help yourselves get some grant, and maybe we can share, or maybe if there's organizations that serve the same type of clientele in one part of the county or another, we might be willing to share or help each other. That's my wish for all of you.
Well, thank you so much, Allison. Sorry, go ahead.
The NPW is doing a workshop in March, and that Bijan is doing with Jill Singer, who many of us know, about data and storytelling. I don't remember the date, but I just March NPW, another data with a slightly different pitch. Okay.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
Allison. This
Yes.
is
And thank you everyone
phenomenal.
for joining us.
Thank you,
Allison,
Marie.
thank you
Thank you,
for
Jeffrey.
the idea. I will be in touch with program recording and materials, and take the survey, please. Thanks, everyone.
Are we good? Were we okay?
Yeah, I think we can stop recording, Deb. Shelley's suggesting that we continue the conversation at the connections call, so it's a good idea.